Hi there. In this lecture we see Andrei Lilienthal against Rashid Nezhmetdinov in 1951 URS Championship semi-final. So d4, knight f6, c4, we have d6, the old Indian defense, one of Nezhmetdinov's favorite openings. So here e5, knight f3. If white plays d takes, this isn't such a major inconvenience. In fact, here knight c6 is perhaps better than knight d7. We don't even need to, play c6 for king c7. This position should be fine for black. So this is an example. Bishop b4 check, taking out d2, taking out d5. This is going to be fine. It's an even position overall. So, okay, so knight f3 is played. Knight bd7, g3, e takes d4, knight takes d4, g6, bishop g7, bishop g2, bishop g7, both sides castle, b3, knight c5, b4, knight e6, knight b3, knight d7. So the knight is hit with this move on c3. Bishop b2 protects the knight. Knight e5 hits c4 now. We have knight a5. So putting pressure on b7 and also protecting c4. We have an interesting move, knight d4. Knight a4 is played. The knights are a bit weird in this game. Makes it quite a memorable game with these knights on the edge. If queen takes d4, what would you play for 10 points? Yeah, check all checks. Knight f3 check. That would be a bad decision by white to lose the queen. So knight a4. Now, trying to exploit these knights, which seems to be stumbling around, c5. Great move, it seems. We have a3. If b takes, that does undermine our knight. So what we do is, well, what would you play for 5 points? We need a desperado tactic. Knight takes e2 check, then take out a5. This position isn't so bad. We have options here. Bishop g4, f3, bishop e6 is about even. If we also have the option of taking on a4, but then bishop takes e5. But then you might think, well, rook e8. Not so clear here. f4, f6, queen d1 hits the queen and also prepares d7. So this position, d7 gets back material. White ends up with a small edge. So anyway, a3 is played. Bishop g4. And now white commits the bishop takes d4, c takes. So we have lurking ideas of d3 in this position. h3, the bishop drops back. And now this is what I'd say is a more major root cause mistake in this game, c5. So why is it actually a mistake? These knights have been stumbling around in this game. It would be nice to secure a central place for one of them at least. And it seems that knight takes b7, where they're both conspiring to establish a knight on d6, is a good idea. So here, forget about h3. White just plays c5. After bishop takes h3, knight takes d6. This position, it's still a bit dangerous for white's king, especially after d3. But it turns out here we can, white can play e4 supported by that knight, and white should be able to claim a small edge. So it does seem knight takes b7 was the way to go. It would kind of resolve some issues with these knights. But c5 doesn't. And in fact, there's a forcing move which was perhaps underestimated by white here, which Nezhmetdinov plays. There's two different ones, in fact, which are pretty good for black to get a nice advantage. Nezhmetdinov plays. Can you guess what are the two moves I'm thinking about here? Yeah, b5 was chosen by Nezhmetdinov. Also, b6 is good here because, in contrast to before, this is quite a contrast to before. Knight takes, bishop takes h3. It is kind of different. If bishop takes a8, rook takes, it's a kind of precarious position here after queen c6 for white. threatening queen g2, checkmate. And let's say f3, b takes, d3 to undermine, trying to undermine white's king safety. So this position, d takes e2, black ends up being significantly better. So yeah, b6 is also, it's a good move, but b5 was played, which is good. C takes makes things worse. Knight b7 basically had to be played, and here knight b2. So bishop takes, get that knight to d6. Bishop takes, king takes, a5. Black is a little bit better in this variation overall. Instead of knight b7, if bishop takes a8, queen takes a8. On knight b2, bishop takes h3, so threatening checkmate. f3, bishop takes f1, and black ends up being significantly better here after d3. This keeps being a thematic undermine move with that pawn on d4. So this position, we're actually going to end up big material up. Well, actually, yeah, it's devastating. It's not that actually big material up. It's the exchange up. But look at white's king, and it's also, yeah, white's king is weak. So okay, so c takes b6 is played. A takes, bishop takes a8. So here, if knight c6 instead, trying to preserve that bishop, black could take on c6, bishop takes, and now play bishop takes h3. Just welcome bishop takes a8, because queen takes a8, threatening queen g2 mate. f3, there's d3 here, opening up the bishop. And in this variation, yeah, we're doing very well here. 2 bishops versus a rook. Okay, and instead if e takes there, bishop takes, this is even worse. We're just loads of material up, we're rook up. So bishop takes a8 was tried, queen takes a8, knight takes b6. So this does seem to push the queen away from being on this diagonal. So there is a choice of queen e4, perhaps. But actually, in this situation, what do you think Nezhmetdinov played instead? He goes actually with a tempo gainer, queen a6, limiting white's replies. So the knight stumbles back. Now bishop takes h3. Rook c1. d3. This is very dangerous how the queen can actually pop back to this diagonal. We have e takes, queen a8, f3, and now things get really cool after this next move. For 10 points, what would you play here? Yeah, exploiting that kind of pinned pawn to g2, knight g4. And also opening up the bishop. So knight c4 is played. If f takes g4, queen g2 is mate. So knight c4 is tried, bishop d4 check, king h1. Now, yeah, white's king is looking pretty weak. There's a lot of, you could say this is a lot of Nezhmetdinov's game. There's a lot of arrows pointing around white's king here, basically. There are a lot of arrows to white's king. How many arrows to the black king? This is like one of the secrets of Nezhmetdinov. If think of this in terms of arrows to the king, is just the amount, it's quite a large amount of arrows basically around the king. So he goes with actually queen d5 to actually intensify, things with queen h5. We have rook c2. So if rook e1, queen h5, f takes, bishop takes g4, check, shields the queen, and then queen h3 is checkmate. So rook c2 is tried. But now, yeah, guess what? Yeah, we can just take the rook on f1, and that's winning. End of game. If queen takes f1, queen h5 check. And what is white doing? King g2, there's queen h2 checkmate. White can only kind of delay. It's a ridiculous delay. So yes, very nice game. What is the key error? I would say it's the stumbling knights, that they needed to establish themselves to be able to parry all this pressure that black had against the white king. A lot of pressure. Very, very interesting, dynamic game indeed. I hope you got something out of this game, some key points. Okay. Even if it's at minimum, get a lot of arrows basically pointing to the opponent's king. There was so much pressure. While white was kind of trying to play positioning on the queen side. So it's not so much about arrows to black's king, it's about arrows on this side of the board, which are not going to be so fatal. Checkmate ends the game, you could say. Okay, so yeah, fascinating game. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much. All comments, questions, likes and subscribes, really appreciated. Thanks so much.